We have a brand new article from Nintendo Life that was talking to Naoki Hamaguchi, and they were asking him about Switch 2 and Final Fantasy VII Remake. This should come as no surprise because he's been doing a whole series of interviews about Switch 2 and about FF7 Retrilogy coming to it. However, there is something in this interview that seems to allude that potentially he could be the one working on Final Fantasy 17. Now, this is something that I have been talking about quite a lot because I've suspected that they're the ones working on it for a really long time because they have a 2-game pipeline. They were working on the planning stages for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth all the way back when Final Fantasy VII was in production. Essentially, they also have been planning 7R3 even when Rebirth was in production. So let's go ahead and take a look what the article says. One of the biggest RPG franchises for us is Xenoblade Chronicles. I'm curious if you played the Monolith developed games and if these have influenced your approach to the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. I remember when I was involved with the Xeno games that we made in the past with Square Enix. Wait, Hamaguchi worked on the Xeno games? I actually did not know that. But unfortunately, I haven't played the most recent ones from Nintendo. I'm sorry about that. But if you talk about other Nintendo games that have influenced me, I've taken a lot from, and you might think this a bit of a cop-out, then it'll be Zelda, Breath of the Wild. It's such an inspirational game, and I've learned so much from that. Looking at how it's affected the Remake series, moving from Remake to Rebirth, and that switch to more open-world gameplay, Breath of the Wild was hugely influential there. That's not terribly surprising for me. There is a lot of Breath of the Wildness in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. A lot of people attribute it to Ubisoft, but yeah, I could always tell that he probably got that from Breath of the Wild. If you compare the kinds of games we make in Final Fantasy with Zelda, in some ways the approach is slightly different. Our games very much start with the story. Bro didn't work at SE until 2006. The only Xeno game SE worked on was Xenogears in the 90s. Yeah, I'm actually really confused. Which Xeno game was he involved with then? And so yeah, Square only had one Xeno game. So I don't know. Anyone in chat want to research that really quickly and maybe figure that out? Maybe they helped on Xenosaga? It had to be, right? I mean, this is from Hamaguchi himself, so maybe he did work for Bamco before working at Square. I don't know. And that's actually really interesting, him saying that they start with the story, because if you don't know, essentially, Zelda games, they come up with what they want the Zelda game to play like first, and then they slap a narrative onto it. So Zelda is entirely dictated by whatever gameplay thing they want to do and not necessarily a story thing. And I know this was kind of controversial for some Zelda fans when they first came out, because there's a lot of Zelda fans that are dedicated to the timeline, the Zelda timeline, but honestly, I'm gonna be real with you, Nintendo does not give a flying about the Zelda timeline. That is something that they came up with later, and I think that most Zelda fans really discovered how much they didn't care once Tears of the Kingdom came out, and just completely ignored all the timeline stuff because they couldn't make it fit. They probably could have made it fit, but they didn't want to make it fit. Nintendo both acknowledges and doesn't give a fuck about the timeline. Yeah, I mean, they basically created it because it was a cool idea. It's something that, fans really like the idea of, and so they kind of acknowledged it themselves, and then they basically just backed off of it. But anyway, he says, and then we worked out what kind of gameplay experience we want to add to create that story and the feeling of being in that story. I think Zelda does it the other way around. They start with the gameplay experience, and then the setting and world is kind of fitted around that. So telling a story around gameplay first, seeing how Zelda achieved this, was definitely an inspiration for Rebirth. So yeah, I think that you can definitely feel the inspiration there. Zelda timeline is cooked, been cooked. It's one of those things where I was like, I don't know, the Zelda timeline was never gonna come to a head of any type of climax, so I never cared about it because I felt like caring about it was setting myself up for disappointment. If I locked into the Zelda timeline, I was basically consenting to my own self being let down. And I think again that we did kind of see people experience that with Tears of the Kingdom, and there was all this disappointment around Tears of the Kingdom narratively, and I'm just like, people are out here caring about Zelda games narratively in this day and age. It's kind of a shock to me. because I never saw them as like super near. I mean, I did like during like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. After that, though, it never seemed to like really be interested in trying to tell some type of all-encompassing story that between all of its different games. It just seemed to want to do the fun thing. And then Nintendo even came out and said, yeah, we just want to do the fun thing. We don't really think about the story that much. I have been beating the drum for quite some time now that I believe Creative Studio won people who are working on Final Fantasy XVII. Of course, they're also the ones that are working on Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy. As we have discussed, they have a pipeline that allows this team to accommodate 2 games. My understanding of it from these interviews is that essentially, as they work on one game and they finish one game up, they then cycle those team members to begin planning and then developing the next game. So as we've looked at quotes in the past in previous videos and streams where we talked about how all the way back in 2019, they had began planning for Rebirth. And this only makes sense. At a later point in development, once the people who are the higher up creatives who work on the game's story and work on the game's concept art, you know, those types of people, as they finish up working on one project, you're not really going to need them at that late point in development. So a lot of them can get cycled on to the studio's next project. In this case, they get cycled on to Rebirth. Makes sense, right? And then with Rebirth, they're developing Rebirth. Rebirth is going along nicely. They begin the planning and pre-production for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. This gets interesting. You may think, well, that's probably going to stop when Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 comes out, right? Well, what if I told you that they had that same pipeline in place and they continue to use that pipeline for basically Final Fantasy XVII, and that's what I believe they're doing. Nintendo Life asked them, when you're done with the 3rd entry in the trilogy, will you be taking a much-deserved break? Do you have other projects that you're working on? In my position, I am the director of the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, so my biggest focus at the moment is getting Part 3 done and seeing fan reactions to that. In addition, I'm also the head of Creative Studio 1, so that's involved in making other games which I'm a part of. One big thing I'm looking forward to in the future is having the team I put together work on something new. One thing that's common in the industry is that when a project is finished, the team is split and moved around. But that hasn't happened here. We basically got the same guys all the way from the beginning of the project right through to the end. So I'm really looking forward to the game that we look to create after. Could be a Final Fantasy. It could be something completely different. I've not yet decided, which is a lie, by the way. But it's the type of lie that all producers and directors have to tell. They're always like, oh, I don't know yet, or we haven't decided yet. Dude, they decided like 2 years ago. What it really means is they haven't revealed it yet. Anyways, he continues by saying, but whatever it is, gamers who have paid attention and seen what we've done with the remake trilogy, they'll have great expectations and look forward to seeing what the team comes up with. What do you guys think? Because I am thinking that more than likely this is Final Fantasy XVII. Dude, if they're making FF17 with the exact same team, they're gonna make the best mainline, I think. I think they are too. And for a few reasons. The first is that they're going to be going into FF17 with all of the knowledge that they have from the Re-Trilogy. Things like airships can be their day one, right? Because they already have established tech and code for that. It can roll over into the next game. Two, this team has already been doing a really fantastic job with the gameplay of the Re-Trilogy. I also think that in terms of story, everyone feels like the FF7 characters are at their best in Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy for the most part. And they also won't be shackled to a source material in the same way that they are with FF7 Re-Trilogy, right? So it's a lot harder, or, you know, people are a lot more skeptical with 7R and a lot more critical because there is a source material there and we can compare it to that. However, with FF17, they'll have a clean slate. They won't have, you know, decades worth of expectations riding on them in terms of the story and how it's supposed to go, and they'll have a lot of freedom there. And I think that as long as they can bring the same type of feeling to the found family, again, that we talked about before, that every JRPG really strives for, and make that something into brand new characters with Final Fantasy XVII, really remembering kind of the best of Creative Studio 1's lineage, you know, the best of like FF10, the best of the 13 trilogy, the best of Remake trilogy, and bringing that all together. I really do think that FF17 could be a superb mainline FF title, probably one of the best even. And also too, what I talked about before, we don't have teams working on 2 mainline Final Fantasy games in a row. The last time that happened was Final Fantasy VII and 8, and since then it has passed from team to team, but it's never the same director for 2 titles in a row, pretty much ever. And I think that, you know, technically this could, you know, you could argue that this would be the first time if this does happen, because you could technically count re-trilogy games as mainline, depending on who you are. Generally speaking, in terms of the numbered titles, it hasn't happened. The kind of problem with this, though, is that we never have a situation where a team can just take all of their knowledge and directly go into the next Final Fantasy thing and it be like out of this world good, right? It's always years in between and it's never a direct transition. And so, yeah, we just don't have that. And it's really unfortunate. Wasn't FF7 all the teams were, well, I mean, it was all of the people that were working on Final Fantasy at that one point in time. And then a lot of those people split off. Right? Like Final Fantasy VII had so many, OG had so many genius people working on it that many of those developers split off and became their own auteurs, basically their own really influential creators. You know, it was a crazy time because Sakaguchi, I think, was a mastermind at finding talent. I don't even think that, like, when we talk about like Sakaguchi's legacy as a creative, I don't even think that necessarily it was Sakaguchi's like ability to make games so much as it was Sakaguchi's ability to see things in people. I think that's actually his real legacy when it comes to game development. He basically was always able to find this talent and to know how to foster them and to know how to bring out the best in them. And I think that that is actually kind of his legacy more than anything, like legitimately being FF dad, more or less, but not in the way of like, oh, you know, he's like the creator of Final Fantasy in that sense, which, I mean, yes, he still is, kind of being like FF dad in the sense of like, he, you know, had this like paternal instinct of raising up everyone he thought was talented and allowing them to thrive and do their own thing, you know, whether it was Tetsuya Nomura, whether it was Matsuno, Tetsuya Takahashi, all these other incredible developers that would go on to make some of the most influential games of all time. I just don't want them to ditch this for like something else, you know? I know he said that he won't use the exact same battle system, but it's possible that he could use the foundation of that battle system for something else. And that's all I want. I want to be clear. I don't want them to use the exact same battle system. But the thing about the concept that they came up with in Final Fantasy VII Remake, where you're opening the command menu, you're building up an ATB bar, you're switching party members, just keep those fundamental concepts. You can remix them any way you see fit. You can add a jump button. You can add a job system. Subtract the stagger bar and replace the stagger bar with something else. You can do any number of things to keep that battle system interesting, to keep that core foundation interesting. Just please don't sub it out for something else. I think for the most part, and you know, again, I read an uncomfortable amount of discourse and comments from the YouTube channel, from you guys' chats, from Twitter, from everything that is ever being said in the Final Fantasy community. I also watch Japanese Final Fantasy channels. Look at the comments on Japanese Final Fantasy channels. Through all of that, this battle system is the one action battle system that they have come up with that action people like and turn-based people aren't offended by. And so if they are going to keep action, I do believe this is kind of the only way to proceed forward. Because if you don't, somebody is going to be pissed. Somebody is not going to like. This is the only thing that they can do at this point, combat-wise, I really think, to keep most people on board, other than going with like a turn-based game again. But even now, there are some action Final Fantasy fans that would be like a little bit disappointed they don't go with action. I do want to check out the VGC interview too. 16 had no strategic features into the gameplay, and it was just a hack and slash. They made both audiences upset. I mean, yeah, I mean, it definitely has like its own audience too. Like, I mean, the hack and slash community seems to really enjoy it. I don't know if it necessarily made everyone upset, but it definitely did piss off like a ton of people. So let's get into the important parts here. So when it came to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a lot of people weren't huge fans of the pacing. And this is kind of weird to talk about because I don't think that Rebirth was necessarily a poorly paced game, but it was a game where you had to basically pace yourself. I think that if you beeline that game, it's actually phenomenally well paced. However, if you get caught up in a lot of the side content, that can definitely slow the game down, but as is the case with most games. But I think with Rebirth, to like a very strong degree, there was just so much content that you could do at any given time, and you were paced that content by each zone. So it felt like as you went from zone to zone, you would spend all this time doing the open world stuff, and for some people that got a little bit tiring. So here is what he has to say about Part 3's pacing. Hamaguchi said, also elaborated on his recent comments that Part 3 would feel more concise, explaining that he intends to make the third game better paced rather than condensing its content as some had feared. It's about making sure the pacing feels right. It's not about cutting out content. It's about making sure that the speed that the story progresses at feels right. It is fairly quick and feels like you can get through it at a reasonable pace. Because I don't want them to necessarily cut the content. I think that people just want it to feel snappier and to get through it better. I think for me, the only time that I truly felt like the pacing in Rebirth was just simply intolerable for me. I've said this before. Actually, I think I literally said it like last time we were on stream. But it was just Temple of the Ancients for me. Like that was the only time where I felt like I was losing my mind at how slow the pacing had become at that point. And don't get me wrong, it's not like that chapter and that whole section didn't have some really good narrative moments to it. But a lot of the times, it did feel like you were going around room to room, and those rooms had a ton of the same enemies in them. It just overall felt like it could have been way shorter than like what it was, and that is actually when I started to lose my mind a little bit. I didn't even like lose my mind completely on the Kate Sith section, although for a lot of people that is where they were starting to go crazy. I get it though, because that section also does go on a little bit longer than it should, for sure. But yeah, for me, Temple of the Ancients is where it just completely goes too far with too much. Temple of the Ancients could have had an hour of exploration removed and nothing would be lost narratively. Yeah, I don't think that anything necessitated Temple of the Ancients actually being that long, in my opinion. A problem with the content in Rebirth is not solely the quantity, but the quality. So many copy and pasted life springs and summon shrines with the same 20-second button press minigames, the same annoying chocobo shit. Yeah, I mean, Rebirth's biggest problem was simply that they had too much and there wasn't a big enough quality filter for some of it. So I think it is better to actually cut some of the content that just isn't as good, right? And just really focus on making a really tight experience the entire way through. I think that they wanted like a super massive game that you could spend an insane number of hours on. Hamaguchi talks about how they have different teams handling the ports so that the ports of Final Fantasy VII Retrilogy aren't really impacting the development of the main game. He said, you said multiple teams are handling the ports as part of your shift to multi-platform development. How does that work with you as a director? And how do you ensure that you can maintain synergy with different teams? Rather than having multiple teams work on the same game, certainly for the third game in the series, we've got another team which is working on all the platform versions of that game to reduce the amount of work in terms of adapting to that different hardware platforms. We're working on Unreal Engine on Windows to create the core base version of that game, which is then going to be the template for all versions. I mean, yeah, that's standard Unreal development stuff. The way we're handling it is that there is actually a separate team. It's a team specifically of engineers. We call them the porting squad or the multi-platform squad. These are the ones that look at the technical side of how to move the game and adapt it to different platforms to meet the requirements on those platforms. For example, there's a certain asset which on the specific hardware goes over the regulation, the volumes of data, etc. etc. And that needs tweaking for that specific platform. They will then be the ones mainly handling that. The idea of that is to reduce the burden on the main development team, all the planners, the directors, the creative leads, etc. Obviously, if there's an issue that they need to work on the main dev team side, they will share that information. They'll come back and say, this needs adapting, can we work on that? But generally, they are kept separate to work on all the multi-platform issues. I was actually surprised by the outside reaction to this news. When we released the news that we were going to bring the whole Final Fantasy VII Remake series, all 3 parts of the trilogy, multi-platform, and that the 3rd game is going to go out on multiple platforms, the vast majority of responses that we got were really positive, because it means people can play on the platform they want to play. Yeah, I mean, yeah, true, not wrong. I mean, isn't that you didn't expect that? I would have expected that. How many interviews does Hamaguchi do, man? It's not even the press/marketing rounds for part 3 yet. They're going really hard to promote Final Fantasy VII Remake for Switch 2. And I guess Xbox. The statement really makes it sound like they're working toward day 1 multi-platform release. I hope so, John. I hope so. I really do. I really do. I don't want to buy Final Fantasy VII Remake 3 and then buy it again on PC, you know, like, and then like, you know, playing it on I mean, you know, it's fine on PlayStation 5. It's not bad on PlayStation 5, but it's so much better on a gaming PC. It's night and day difference, and Rebirth really made that clear, and I had such a better experience playing it on PC. I kind of want the first experience to be the best and preferred experience, right? Because with the first 2 Re-Trilogy games, it feels like the best way to play them is not on the original hardware in which they launched on, right? So if you're playing Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, you know, that's better than playing the PS4 version of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And if you played Rebirth, that game is a majillion times better on PS5 Pro and on PC. And so it feels like, you know, buying the PS5 version is nice, but yeah, if you have a gaming PC, then I'd just rather play it on that and not need new hardware. I think they want us to know that Switch 2 is going to be a big platform for Final Fantasy. It should be, because right now they're basically missing out on the domestic market in Japan. And, you know, that could be another 1 million units for them, right? Like back when like PlayStation 2 was big in Japan, for example, you know, they could sell like, you know, 2 million copies of a game there, or over 1 million copies of a game there. And a lot of the Final Fantasy games still sell 1 million in Japan, but that's locked to a platform that is not like super popular there, like PlayStation. And so imagine if it was also available on Switch 2. They could actually have domestic growth, which they pretty much all but given up on this past generation. So he was asked, many modern turn-based games, most notably Clair Obscur Expedition 33 this year, have adopted an active time battle style. That's also wrong. Clair Obscur does not have ATB in it. I think he means reactive turn-based, which is what Clair Obscur calls his system. But anyway, he says, Clair Obscur this year have adopted an active time battle style system where players are still dodging and parrying between turns. As a director on the Final Fantasy XIII series, I wondered if you noticed that and how you think that series would be received today. Yes, I worked on all the Final Fantasy XIII games. I think they were really well done, and I get a lot of response from fans who really like them. There is a really big fan community out there who are really passionate about those games still. Of course, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 came out this year, and there's been a lot of love for fans and the media for that game. But I do remember exactly like you said in your question. I felt like when I saw that, okay, that's what they've done with their game. I remember doing that quite a while ago with Lightning Returns. It does seem to use kind of a similar system to what we did. Somewhat similar. Like Lightning Returns was much more real time than that, and you had to do the job switching and such. It wasn't quite the same, but it was a command-based game where you could parry. Talking about Clair Obscur though, I think it's very easy for people to focus too much maybe on the mechanics side of it. Obviously, it's a very big story in the game industry this year, so it's a very obvious thing to point to. It's followed the JRPG tradition, it's turn-based, but it adds in all these kinds of more action-style mechanics like you got the pinpoint time guard and you've got the parry mechanic, etc. It's clearly part of what makes it a good game. But I don't think people should be focusing too much on that. I think the reason why it's such a good game and why it's done so well and been so well regarded is that overall it has a really great balance of all other aspects to it as well. It's got a really great story, the culture behind it, it's very steeped in French history and culture. They've got that aspect to it, which makes it its own unique right. They've done that very well. The subject of the story as well may be similar in some ways to what modern drama series do and reveal things slowly. But the idea is that you've got this mystery, and as the story progresses, you can learn more about the world and what this mystery really means. I think that's really easy to understand. It's really catchy for people who like that kind of modern storytelling. I think the reason it's such a good game because all of that is so well balanced, and every single aspect is so well done. As a game creator, as someone who looks at how people appreciate games, I don't want people to get too focused on, oh, it's a JRPG, it uses those mechanics, that's why it's popular. I think it's not a case of if you make a JRPG style game, you put those mechanics in, anything is going to sell well. That's not the case. It's because it's such a complete product. I'd be really happy if people appreciate and respect that game for those things, rather than just because it uses that kind of take on JRPG. I find it hilarious that SE employees are being asked about reactive turn-based elements. Yeah, I mean, and that's like the thing. I mean, no one's asking SE about it because, you know, it's like a completely brand new thing and no one's ever heard of it. They're asking SE about it because it's kind of their way of saying, hey, are you ever going to do the thing that you used to do again? That's really what people are asking, you know? And that's what we talked about last time too with Expedition 33, is that no one's really asking for Final Fantasy to become Expedition 33. They're just asking, are you going to make turn-based Final Fantasy again? That's really what this comes down to, right? So it's not like people are asking, hey, will you make this thing more like this completely unrelated game that has nothing to do with FF? They're really just trying to say, hey, bro, we really liked Final Fantasy 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can you do like another one of those? That's what people are really trying to ask. Like, it's not like it's not like they're trying to be like, hey, you need to steal from this French studio. Like, everything should just be like this from now on. They're just really saying that, like, yeah, we missed the old Final Fantasy, and we hope that you will make one like that again. That's what people are really trying to get at. They're not asking, why aren't you copying CD Projekt Red? Right. And there's a specific reason why they're not saying, like, hey, why don't you copy this X thing, right? Because people see this as, okay, this is the way Final Fantasy used to be, and we want you to make Final Fantasy the way it used to be. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right, just to be clear, because I think that there are some arguments for and against. I think probably the way forward is to make something that adapts those elements in the way that Re-Trilogy does. It's not off the table for them to say, make a new turn-based Final Fantasy game either. Either 3 was the worst turn-based game, you just need to parry and that's it. Truthfully, that could truly be said about any action game. Right? If in any action game you had auto parry, then like, what would you even need to do, right? Like, you would basically like be effectively immortal in pretty much any action game ever if you had perfect timing for all animations ever. Technically, like, you know, you can really argue that Sekiro as a game, like, you don't need to do anything in Sekiro. You just literally need to parry in Sekiro. That's it. Like, you don't need to do anything else. You just got to parry. So like, you can really make the argument that like even Sekiro is like a brain dead game, because once you have perfect timing in Sekiro, like nothing else matters. So, but the thing is that I don't think most people don't have like pinpoint timing, so this ends up working. Yeah, I get that we're talking about turn-based, but I'm still saying that for most people did not play that game. If you watch any streams of it, if you played it yourself, most people did not play that game and have pinpoint accuracy with the parry. Most people, like, it took them quite a bit of time to learn each enemy's attacks. And also, it's like a 25-hour main story game. So like the parry like lasts exactly long enough to like not overstay its welcome. If it was a 60-hour game, then I would probably like lean more in your direction. And obviously they have to do something more with Clair Obscur too, right? Like it can't just be more parry slop. And that's also another thing too. If you bump it up to hard, the parry window is even tighter. And by the way, the parry window in Expedition 33 is tighter than like Sekiro by a mile. And I say this because I was actually like playing Sekiro shortly before Expedition 33 came out, and I agree that, you know, like a lot of people try to reduce Clair Obscur to a lot of different things. A lot of people are just like, oh, just because it has realistic people on it, that's why Westerners jumped on it. But I'm like, hey, do you know what other JRPG series put realistic looking characters and realistic looking environments in it in hopes that Western people would like latch onto it? Do you want to know what series actually did that first, that was actually trying to get more attention from outside of Japan? It's actually this small indie series called Final Fantasy. Like, every time someone says that, every time someone's like, oh, Clair Obscur just got the attention because it has the realistic graphics, I'm like, brother, have you fucking heard of Final Fantasy? Do you know why Final Fantasy has realistic graphics? Do you know why like Final Fantasy like 16 looks like that? Do you know why? Do you not know what they were thinking? Do you know why? Do you know why? Do you know why? Like, so fucking stupid. I hate Twitter. I hate everyone on there, including myself. But also, I don't think that realistic graphics alone are what make a JRPG instantly popular. Obviously, it is something that the West can gravitate to, as seen with not Clair Obscur, but Final Fantasy. Yeah, it can make people like, it can draw them to it for sure. But also, before FF ever used realistic graphics, people were still drawn to it anyways. Back when it used more stylized graphics, back when FF7 looked more like manga than realism. And so, yes, you cannot just slap realistic graphics on any JRPG and then suddenly the Westerners will take it seriously. I don't think that, like, you know, like what the fuck are y'all talking about? Like, please stop.